Traders, how are you? With Marcello. Today we're doing the recap of what happened in the markets last week. Economy, finance, rivers are drying up in Europe. The IRS is hiring 87,000 new auditors, quote, that can use deadly force and carry a firearm. But we do have good news on the inflation front that we didn't get an increase over the last month. But the bad news there is we have the highest food grocery costs right now in the last 30 or 40 years. Let's go ahead and get started. Overall for the week, the stocks were mostly positive, mostly around the world. I'll kind of do the breakdown for you here in just a moment. The big piece of news was the inflation information that came out from the government, the report where we didn't have an increase in inflation. That obviously means that the Federal Reserve, which is the central bank of the United States, may not necessarily need to increase as aggressively the interest rates. And the reason why we've had this kind of slowdown, not only in the housing market, but the stock market, absolutely everything, is because we've been living in a bubble essentially for the last, since 2008. How many years is that? 18? That's maybe 15 years, something along those lines. So one of the things to keep in mind is, I know I talk about a lot of things in the videos that kind of seem negatives and there's a crisis coming and things like that. Obviously, I talk about it so you guys can learn, obviously because it's not reported in the mainstream media. But also I want to let you know that in times of crisis, it's one of the best periods in time to be able to make money and get rich. During the Great Depression in 1929, there were more people that became millionaires than at any other point in the history of the world. So don't get negative. Obviously, some of you might think the United States is heading in the wrong direction, even though the polls say that. The majority of us think that the United States is heading in the wrong direction. But there's good news. Medellin, Colombia is coming out with a digital nomad visa. So come down, get a maid, get a chef, and enjoy the spring weather year round. Right? So overall for the week, the stock market in the US, mostly positive, including Canada as well. European markets also were much positive, much positive. That's very good English grammar there, Marcello. Istanbul and Russia were the bigger winners in Europe at over 4%. They're emerging markets, so they have a little bit more volatility. Latin America is mixed for the week, mostly positive, but we did have some negative markets there. Africa and the Middle East that were mixed as well, with Nigeria being the most negative and Saudi Arabia the most positive, and in the far East, mostly positive, with the Philippines being at a 4.59%. Some interesting news in the Bitcoin and crypto space. We have Coinbase dropping over 16% after they reported an over $1 billion loss in Q2. Remember that they either changed or reminded everybody in their terms and conditions that if they do go bankrupt, you essentially lose your money. It's not your money anymore. It's used to cover the bankruptcy. Just remember that. Their revenue declined 64% as we have this crypto winner, and now everybody starting to realize that they can't go buy a shit coin, excuse my French, and get rich tomorrow. Australia's central bank is working with what's called the Central Bank of Central Banks, which is called the Bank of International Settlements, to be able to study and launch a digital currency system. They're testing, quote, the benefits of a blockchain ledger-based digital currency system, just like they were testing the benefits of locking down people in quarantine camps during the pandemic. So I'm sure they don't want to control people at all, right? Conspiracy, Marcello. Australia, 32% of the people in Australia still you want to use cash over credit or debit. In the United States, it's 37%. I think the majority of us, I've been traveling around the world now for 17 years. I'm based here in Colombia. And I think that most of us don't realize that live in big cities that the majority, the real America is kind of everybody in the middle, essentially, right? And a lot of people, they don't have as good of internet. Obviously, the Starlink from Elon Musk is going to help that a lot. But there's a whole nother world out there. 37% is a pretty sizable chunk of people that still prefer to use cash instead of credit or debit. Bitcoin overall is up for the week. All the crypto markets for the most part, even Shiba Inu. Got to do an update with the new hairstyle. Bitcoin's up for the week, 7.06%, just a touch over 22,800. In commodities, Elon Musk even said that he's seeing that the prices of the commodities that he's buying for things like SpaceX and Tesla are starting to come down. A lot of the commodities that he needs, more than half, are going down rather than up. So that's another good sign in terms of the inflation. The UK is planning organized blackouts this winter for industry and household. They're saying that the days in the cold weather combined with the gas shortages may provide an emergency situation for the energy of the country. So there may be 4 days, they said, in January, which is the coldest month, that they're going to have an emergency and actually do planned outages. Beginning in the week as well, Spanish government is now decreeing that all shops, department stores, cinemas, hotels, and public buildings are going to be restricted at the amount of AC that they can put their rooms at. In the summer, they can't have their AC above 27 degrees Celsius. That's 81 degrees Fahrenheit in the summer. And in the winter, they can't have the heating above 19 degrees Celsius and 66 degrees Fahrenheit. In addition to that, the beautiful lights that we always see in Europe, right? The beautiful facades of the shops, they're going to have to turn off their lights at 10 p.m. and access stores are going to have to be restricted to make sure that the AC doesn't go out. And the government, just like a great socialist government that they are, they're going to impose a severe fines for anybody that it goes against those rules. France is bracing for their fourth heat wave in the summer. They're also worst drought on record. It's leaving villages in the countrysides without safe drinking water and farms. The crops now are starting to suffer as well. Remember, we talked about the food shortages that are coming that I started talking to you guys about in 2020. The villagers are actually being brought in truck full of water because they're not able to have any potable water, which is actually pretty serious. The temperatures are expected to exceed 37 degrees Celsius. That's 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. That's like a normal summer day in Florida. Like, these people can handle a little bit of sun. Joking. And an economic slowdown in Germany is now likely more than ever now that the Rhine River, which is part of the border between France and Germany, is at a lower level than it's economically viable to use. So we're talking about, coal, iron ore, commodities, agriculture, absolutely everything. Europe is on course to suffer its worst drought in 500 years and extremely violent wildfires, as well as France is going to approach the 100-degree weather mark. Northern Mexico is running out of water, and this you may not be important to you for all of you guys listening in the United States, but as I always do these videos so you guys can learn how to be able to project things and kind of connect the dots, Northern Mexico is where 76% of all the beer imported to the US comes from. So if we have a problem with water in Northern Mexico, that means that we're most likely going to have a beer shortage in the United States. President AMLO, which is the president of Mexico, is saying that he wants to be able to help the production of a lot of these beer factories, move them to water-rich areas instead of being in the north. But we always wonder, for example, how these civilizations like the Aztecs, for example, just disappeared from one day to the next. Probably a drought. Power grid is shut down in Iraq as the temperatures there exceeded 51 degrees Celsius or 123.8 degrees Fahrenheit and a heat wave from hell. And 75,000 Brits are going to go up against the system like that movie V for Vendetta, where they're just going to stop paying their bills. They're saying that if the government isn't going to do anything about the exploding prices of energy bills due to the inflation, obviously, they're just going to go ahead and just stop paying their bills on October 1st. That's going to be interesting to see. That could cause a lot of problems. Signs of the Ukraine export stability is starting to be seen as well, as 4 more grain ships are leaving the port. So we could have a little bit of reprieve when it comes to the fertilizer and even the food shortage issue that we've been talking about a lot recently. And Australia is looking to cut overseas liquid natural gas sales as they're projected to have a shortfall in supplies in 2023. So they're looking to sell it locally rather than exporting it. And this is a big problem for Asia Pacific because now they already have tight supplies, because remember that Australia is a huge export country. A lot of raw materials come from Australia. And obviously we have the situation where Europe, their demand is exploding because they're not buying anything or not wanting to buy anything from Russia. So that's going to put a strain now on the energy in the Asia Pacific region. US crude, both are positive over 4%. Turkey is now agreeing to pay for Russian gas partially with rubles. which is more indication that the dollar is going to have a significant amount of trouble. I'm going to talk to you guys here in just a moment about 80% of the dollars, 80 of the dollars that have been created in the history of the United States were created in the last 2 years. The debt is absolutely unsustainable. And we're going to get to that in just a moment. The world's going to end. Prepare yourself. Gold went up 1.57% to 1805, where silver went up close to 5% to $20.97. Financial and banking news. There's a company called U.S. Life Insurance Company that said deaths unexplainably increased by 40% between 18 to 49-year-olds. There's been a 300% increase in cancer patients over the last year as well as 36,000 new cancer Let me start that one over. As well as 36,000 new cancer patients to over 120,000 in America. I wonder what happened over the last 2 years since the start of the pandemic, where all of a sudden there's an increase in deaths. What could it be? You guys are getting the indirect message there, right? Conspiracy, Marcello. The preppers were right. 80%, as I mentioned, of all the US dollars in existence have been printed over the last 2 years. This is a big problem because the percentage of the debt to GDP ratio, which is the amount of debt total that we have compared to the size of the economy in the US, is at 125%. Now, a lot of analysts say that once we reach the 90% mark, anything above that starts to cause a lot of problems, in addition to decreased economic growth, which obviously, if the economy is growing and everybody's making money, we have a lot less problems, right? So in the last 2 years, 80% of the money in the US has been printed. And the problem with that is we're now at a situation where if interest rates were at the historic norm, the average over our history of this central bank, side note, this is the third central bank the United States has had in its history, not the first or the second, but the third. The first two collapsed, just so you know. So if the interest rates were at historic levels, at the average of what they have been, 5-6% around there, we would be paying more money on interest than we have even in a budget. It would be more than the defense bill, more than all the social services. So there's a problem now where the Fed is literally in a cat and pony game where cat and tail, I don't know if I said that right, but I think you guys are getting my drift. If they raise the interest rates too much, it's going to put a strain on the finances in the US and we're not going to be able to pay the interest on the debt. But if they don't increase the interest rates, then the inflation is get out of control. So you see how it's damned if you do, damned if you don't. And that's why we're going to have a pretty serious economic crisis coming. But remember, that's one of the best times to be able to make money. So learn how to trade and make your millions over the next few years. Grocery inflation is at its highest level in 43 years, even though Biden is talking about there's zero inflation messaging. It's the highest since 1979. China's factories gate inflation went down from its peak to its level back to February 2021, which is a good thing because obviously we buy everything from China, right? U.S. consumer prices, as I mentioned, stayed the same at 8.5%. The annual inflation rate in France went up to 6.1%, which is the highest in 37 years. The Spain inflation rate went up to 10.8%, which is the highest in 38 years. And the Socialist Republic of Italy, the annual consumer inflation decelerated, went down to 7.9%. Political news, Gustavo Petro is the first leftist president in Colombia, pledging to unite the polarized country against inequality and climate change, in addition to saying that he's going to achieve peace with the guerrillas that keep, they do stuff on the countryside. He said he's only taxing during his campaign. He talked about he only plans to tax the rich, but he just added a 10% tax to breads, empanadas, which, the food you sell on the street, even Coca-Cola products like, what do you call that in English? Gaseosa, as you say it in English, the everything that Coke sells and Pepsi, that's what a gaseosa is. And unfortunately, that most of the people that consume those products are poor people, so it's actually taxing everybody. FBI raided Mar-a-Lago, which is Trump's resort home in Palm Beach, Florida, Monday evening. I'm not going to extend on that because we don't want to get banned. And the United States Democrats scored a major policy victory when the Senate passed the quote-unquote Inflation Reduction Act bill, which is a $740 billion climate change, healthcare, and tax bill, which included 87,000 new auditors for the IRS. And in the new job description, they stated carry a firearm as part of the job description and be willing to use deadly force if necessary. The preppers were right, just remember. Corporate news, Disney shares are up 14.4 million subscribers now. They now have more subscribers than Netflix. There was a 45% increase in that. It's obviously much higher than what was expected. They now have 221 million subscribers globally. Elon Musk stated also with his Twitter purchase that if they can confirm how they sample 100 accounts to be able to confirm how many accounts are real and how many are spam, if they're willing to do that, then they should proceed with the $44 billion deal. But if it turns out that in their SEC filings were materially false, then the deal shouldn't go through. But he did just sell almost $7 billion worth of shares on August 5th and August 9th. And one of the great things about Elon Musk, if you guys follow his Twitter and look at the tweets and replies, he literally, shoots off replies to all kinds of people. And so I just got a friend that's visiting here. And so one of the great things is that if he decides to go ahead and purchase it, will probably be, doing a much better situation when it comes to Twitter. Not a lot of trade news in technology. Alphabet, which is the owner of Google and YouTube, launched an online store which are going to start streaming videos from. And that's important because obviously they're going to own everything and offer that everything as well. You could literally just open it directly from your Play Store. And investment news, not a lot there. International events, the military announced new military drills in China around the sea and airspace in Taiwan on Monday. This is after they infuriated China, the United States, with a visit with Pelosi. And there's been a huge power outage in Toronto, which is the biggest city in Canada, in their downtown. The core unit there in downtown, one of the city's biggest shopping malls, and literally, I don't know if you guys have been there in Dundas Square, but that whole area had a blackout. Supposedly, there was a Portlands that knocked out a few high voltage transmission lines. Ethiopia is completing its third phase of filling the reservoir called the Grand Renaissance Dam, GERD. It's a $4 billion hydro dam project, but there's a little bit of infighting between Sudan and also Egypt because the same river that they built the dam on is the same river that goes down to Egypt and also Sudan. And so there's a little bit of a risque situation there. And in unusual facts this week, sinkhole in Chile that's about 200 meters down. That's 656 feet. You can literally put, I don't know if you guys seen the cross statue in Brazil, which is huge. It's like the Statue of Liberty, probably not as big, but big enough. You can literally stack 6 of these on top of each other. And now that it's expanded to 160 feet or 50 meters, more than doubled in size. So definitely not having those environmental problems that we talked about. I am going to go have some steak, dumplings, and wine with a beautiful view here in Medellin, Colombia. Remember to prepare yourself because the preppers were right. We'll see you next week.